coming on this beautiful spring evening here in Memphis. It's great to see so many of our journalism students here at this event. My name is Tom Rock, and I am Associate Professor here in the Department of Journalism. And I would like to thank you all for attending this, the 34th Annual Freedom of Information Congress event, which is sponsored by the University of Memphis Chapter of Society of Professional Journalists, along with the University of Memphis Journalism Department. And I know we have a number of students here, so if all the students could make sure that they did sign the sign-up sheet out there. And then we also had some index cards. If you could grab one of those index cards and just jot your name and your class down on that. And what we'll do is we'll collect those on the way out. And if you don't have one, I think my colleague Bob has them right there. So, tell you what, a little bit about our Freedom of Information Congress event. This is an event that has brought top journalists and thinkers to the University of Memphis campus, and it goes back all the way to the early 1980s. And the goal has been to hear a little bit about journalism and some issues dealing with the importance of the freedom of information and to the public. So first off, I'd like to make a few introductions. So first I'd like to introduce the chair of our journalism department, Dr. David Arand. And then we also have a number of our journalism department faculty members here. So maybe I'd ask them to stand and be recognized. And just a little bit about the Society of Professional Journalists. It's the nation's most broad-based journalism organization. It's dedicated to the practice of free speech in journalism and the high standards of ethical behavior. And I would like to encourage all University of Memphis students to get involved in our U of M chapter. If you're interested, just please contact me, and we'd love to have you as a member of our group. I'd also like to say after our presentation, our speaker will be available to answer a few questions. So here to introduce our speaker this evening is University of Memphis journalism student Sarah Wages.
Good evening. Our speaker this evening is Mr. Frank LoMonte, and he's the director of the Student Press Law Center. Mr. LoMonte joined SPLC in January 2008 after practicing law with Atlanta-based Sutherland LLP and clerking for federal judges on the Northern District of Georgia and the 11th Court Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Before law school, Mr. LoMonte was an award-winning investigative journalist and political columnist for the daily newspapers in Florida and Georgia. He graduated magna cum laude from the University of Georgia School of Law, where he was a senior editor of the Georgia Law Review. His articles about the First Amendment and media law topics have been widely published in Education Week, the Chronicle of Higher Education, the American University Law Review, the University of North Carolina First Amendment Law Review, and many other outlets. Here to talk with us about some important issues concerning freedom of information right here and on colleges across campus, colleges around the nation, is Mr. Frank LoMonte.
Thank you, Sarah. Nobody ever says my name correctly. You have a promising future in broadcasting ahead of you. So this is always great to have an auditorium full of people compelled to be here against their will. I feel like Johnny Cash playing Folsom Prison right now. But that turned out great, so this will too. Thanks to David, to Tom, to everybody in the department for making this visit possible and for making it such a pleasure and such a breeze for me. I really appreciate the hospitality, and I'm enjoying this beautiful campus. I hope you are too. Just by way of introduction to those of you who haven't come across the Student Press Law Center before, the Student Press Law Center is a nonprofit based up in Washington, D.C. that was set up 42 years ago as the result of a book. It actually grew out of a book by a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist named Jack Nelson, who worked for the Los Angeles Times for many years. He actually won his Pulitzer covering the civil rights movement in the South and then went up to run their Washington bureau. Jack spent a year going around the country with a study group visiting high schools around the nation to kind of take stock of the state of journalism in America's schools, and what they found then in 1973 was depressing and alarming, which was that young people were being forbidden by those in authority from talking about issues of social and political concern that were on their minds, to the point where journalism was becoming frustrating and disempowering, and many of them were voting with their feet and just leaving. I would like to report to you that in the 42 years since Jack's book, Captive Voices, was published and the Student Press Law Center was established, that we have found a cure. I cannot, but I can at least leave you with, and I will, some optimistic notes that we may be seeing an end to the time when schools and colleges dictated to young people that they were forbidden from talking about issues of public concern on which their voices are so valuable. My own love affair with the college media started in a year that we will not mention, but when I was in the spring of my freshman year at the University of Florida. It started in a meat locker. It started in the newsroom of the University of Florida student newspaper, the Independent Florida Alligator, which at the time, rather than a newsroom, was housed in what had been the meat locker of a bar. And you entered the newsroom by cranking a refrigerator door handle in what was clearly not a suitable for occupancy premises, as I found out on that spring day when I answered an ad in the newspaper, Writers Wanted. And I showed up at the premises certain that I had made a mistake when I walked into this grubby alleyway behind a dumpster to open this freezer door and admit myself to a lifetime of journalism adventure. When I got inside the room, I stepped about 1.5 steps inside before I froze, seeing that the moldy carpet was peeling up at the corners, and the ceiling was missing half of its tiles, and the workstation had broken, outdated, and inadequate equipment. The whole place had paneling that looked like something that came out of your grandfather's basement, or maybe off the side of your grandfather's station wagon. The whole place looked like it was more suited for storing prime ribs than for creating news. And the one and only person, just as I was about to leave, assuming I'd made the wrong turn, I see sitting at a desk. For those of you who are fans of old 1980s movies, this guy at the time was a lookalike for Jeff Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He's now the political editor of the Boston Globe. But at the time, David looked exactly like Sean Penn in his stoner phase. And David just looks at what must have been a telling look of horror on my face, and he says, "Yeah, you gotta make it a little bit unattractive to get the right kind of people to want to work here." Well, if that's our goal, then I would say mission accomplished, because we have now made it uniquely unattractive for people to work in the college media as a result of a confluence of factors that we'll talk about. We have never asked people in college media to do more with less than we are asking of them today. We have never demanded more and provided less than we are today. The college media increasingly is being asked to bear the burden of gathering and providing the news that paid professionals once brought us. I'm sorry to bum out those of you who are studying for an anticipated lifetime working in professional newsrooms, but the American Society of News Editors has been telling us for several years now that professional newsrooms are hemorrhaging jobs at a rate of about 3,500 positions a year. That's 3,500 people every year who used to be staffing those school boards, those city halls, those county commissions, those state legislatures, and are not anymore. Who's filling that gap? Who is bringing us the information that comes out of those city halls, those county commissions, those school boards, those state legislatures? Increasingly, it is the people in this room who are. The Pew Research Center came out with a study the year before last looking at the state of state capitol bureaus all across the country, looking at who was covering the State House. And it turns out that 14%, 1 out of every 6 people covering a state capital is a college student. 1 out of every 6 people that is bringing us the news out of state capitals is a college student, and there are actually 4 states where college students outnumber salaried professionals in the state capital press corps. So students are increasingly the public's last line of defense to find out what is going on in the community, and they are doing a remarkable job. I've got one headline here from a project called News 21 at Arizona State that does some really eye-popping work of professional caliber, but is doing so not for a paycheck, not for a 401k and a dental plan, but doing so for college academic credit. And increasingly, that center of gravity of where news is created is moving from the newsroom into the classroom. The Brookings Institution, a think tank up in Washington, D.C., took stock a couple of years ago of education journalism in public media. They looked at the major news organizations in print, in broadcast, and online for a 9-month period of time covering 1 school year. And they asked how much news during that 9-month school year was about education topics as opposed to everything else. And what they found, the headline gives it away, 1.4% of all the news coverage in America's major media outlets was given over to education, and that's not even the bad part. The bad part is that of that 1.4%, most of it was crisis-driven. It was things like school shootings or school disease epidemics. Very little of it was actual education policy coverage, and less still was higher education policy coverage, which has always been the weak stepsister of education coverage. And so you're talking about literally less than 1% of all the news coverage in mainstream American media devoted to higher education. Who is filling that gap? You are. People in this room are. But you're doing it frequently without the benefit of the same legal protections that those paid salaried professionals can rely on. There are a number of large states, Florida, Texas, New York, among them, that don't extend the reporter's privilege, for instance, to unpaid journalists. They only extend the privilege, right, which is the ability to keep your sources confidential, the ability to make an enforceable promise of confidentiality to your sources, only to people who are making a living as professional journalists, thereby excluding the majority of the journalists in their state. Because guess what, right? Most journalists in America are working for credit and not for a paycheck. There are many more people doing journalism in schools and colleges than will ever do it in a professional newsroom setting. And so in those large states and others, the majority of journalists are going out in the field naked of that fundamental legal protection that professionals can count on. And similarly, I'll talk a little about this more in a minute, many of you in this room are going out not with full confidence and assurance that the First Amendment will protect you either, that the First Amendment will have the same rigor with which it protects our professional journalism colleagues. The Supreme Court has told us over and over again that the government can stop professional journalists under almost no circumstances whatsoever. There's almost no set of facts under which the government could stop a professional news organization from publishing. But once the news organization moves on campus, we no longer have that assurance, and journalists operate under second-class constitutional citizenry, which is inadequate to the demands that we are placing on you as our frontline primary news gatherers. Well, for many years, college journalism was kind of floating above the economic realities that were causing those 3,500 job losses every year. For many years, college journalism was a success story and a survival story. As newsrooms were cutting back and scaling back and laying off and downsizing, college media was thriving because advertisers still wanted to put those haircut coupons and burrito coupons in front of you. And the model worked because the overhead was very low, the salaries were very low, the publication itself was given away for free. It seemed like this was going to be the success story, the exception to the rule. And it turns out that it's not. The air has come out of the college student media economic model in many ways, just as it has for professional news operations around the country. And you're seeing exactly the same thing. Many student news operations are cutting back their professional staff, their paid managerial staff, advertising, circulation, distribution staff. Many of them are cutting out printing days. One of my old schools, University of Georgia, now publishes a print newspaper only 1 day a week instead of the former 5, which was historically the practice. And so we're seeing some of the same adjustments being made in the college media in recognition of the economic realities that are buffeting the entire industry as well. So college media is no longer surfing above the fray. They're very much in the fray, and very much people are looking to the folks in this room. In fact, relying, depending, praying that the folks in this room will invent that next economic model that makes journalism an economically viable concern again. Well, I'm going to focus tonight on 3 propositions about the future of journalism and making a viable way for journalism, not just on campus, but in our communities as well. And journalists are very, very good at introspection and criticizing themselves, sometimes to an unhealthy degree. Sometimes we run down the quality of our own product, when in fact it's quite miraculous, really, that a newspaper gets out at all when you think about what's involved in putting one together on a regular basis. But we're going to need, I would submit, to make a series of changes to in our larger culture in order for for journalism to thrive as a going concern given the economic and societal realities of the 21st century. Yes, we're going to have to change our newsrooms. Yes, we're going to have to change how we think about news, how we deliver news, and how we present news. But that by itself is not enough. We're also going to have to change the way our government institutions work. And frankly, we're going to have to change our readers too. We're going to have to work on getting those readers to meet us halfway, because we can't keep chasing their eyeballs down the Snapchat hole. There's only so much news that you can present in 5 seconds, and we have to expect people to do a little bit more work than that in order to be well-informed and participatory citizens. Well, I want to start by proposing to you, and this is just me here. This is not an authoritative definition. You won't find it in Wikipedia, which is, of course, everybody's authoritative source. Of what news is, just as a thought experiment, just as a thought exercise. What is it that distinguishes what we as journalists have to sell, right? What distinguishes that from gossip, from rumor, from pandas rolling in snow videos, right? From things that are pure and purely diversionary or entertaining, which are great, but which are not news, right? And to me, I think this comes pretty close to capturing what differentiates news from entertainment, or let's use the phrase infotainment, right? Which we all find so compelling these days. Explaining situations and processes affecting the audience on which the audience can have an impact, right? This is what's different from the Kardashians, right? The Kardashians are none of these things. We're not explaining the Kardashians. They don't affect you. You can't have an impact on them. But news empowers people when it's done at its best, right? News helps people identify and solve problems in their community and in their country. And so that, right, when you are in the nonprofit world, you will hear from your fundraisers and your consultants to a degree that, and some of you will go into this, by the way, but journalism is a great preparation for running a nonprofit organization, so welcome. You will hear to a degree that will make your ears bleed from your fundraising consultants. What is the value proposition? Why should people donate to your organization? And value proposition is something that you don't hear very much in newsrooms, but you will be hearing more and more, right? What is it that we have to sell as journalists that should make our product worth buying? What is it that we have to sell that is unique and that differentiates us from videos of cats riding on Roombas, which are very entertaining and diverting, but which are neither news nor are going to result in a better informed public? And the value proposition, I would submit to you, and this is not an easy answer, this is hard work, is expertise. That's the value proposition. That's what journalists at their core have to sell that differentiates them from anyone else online, which is to say, right, You depend on a professional journalist to know more than you do so that they can explain to you something that is foreign or unfamiliar in such a way that you can understand it and you can figure out how you might be able to act on it, right? And this is tough. This is really asking a lot of people. This is asking people to dig down deep and gain a mastery of the subject matter that they are delivering in a way that, frankly, many of us in news don't have time for anymore. But we've got to make the time because that's really what gives our work the value. When people ask me, I have students ask me all the time to look at their writing or critique their writing, and I see a lot of student writing because we hire interns. Commercial, we have paid internships, and we love people from Memphis. We've got some really good ones. When students submit writing to me, and I recognize right away good writing from bad writing, I can tell who has expertise and who doesn't, who has mastery of the subject matter and who doesn't. When you understand and you master a subject, you can easily write about it. And that's true in your own life, right? If somebody asks you to write a letter about how you spent your last summer vacation or your Christmas break, you have no trouble writing that letter because you know that better than anyone else. You have expertise, you have mastery of that subject. But not so, maybe, right, when you go to the state legislature and you pick up a copy of a bill or a copy of the budget and you're trying to explain that to your audience. And when I see a story that doesn't make sense, that isn't clear, that doesn't show mastery, that doesn't show expertise, that's when I know that person didn't put in the work, right? Didn't put in the work to actually master the subject and gain the expertise to be able to explain it back to an unfamiliar audience. That's the value proposition, and that's what we have to sell. That's what differentiates journalism from gossip, from speculation, from infotainment. It is the thing that will cause people to say, we hope, right, and I'll get to that, that will cause people to say, yes, your work is worth paying for, which is where we have to get in order for journalism to be a going concern. Well, college journalists have done and are continuing to do really, really remarkable feats of investigative journalism often using public records laws, and I'll give you a couple of examples here since freedom of information is our primary subject matter. College journalists have been able to bring to the public's attention problems on their campus that cause change to happen, which is journalism, right? Otterbein University. Students at Otterbein 360, an online news source, found out that their college was requiring people, when they came to the college to report sexual assault, to sign away their rights and to agree that they would never talk to anybody about these cases in exchange for the college processing the disciplinary complaint. And indeed, you agreed as a condition of having your complaint processed that you yourself could be disciplined if it was found out you would talk to your friends, your family, anybody about this disciplinary case. You had to take a vow of silence. Turns out that's illegal. It's a violation of federal law. When these journalists brought it to the public's attention, it stopped. They made change. They made a difference. They improved their campus. At SMU, students on the SMU Daily Campus newspaper used courthouse records and police records to find out that out of 100 documented cases of sexual assault that had been reported to the authorities, only 1 out of 100 had ever resulted in anyone ever serving a day in prison. Only one. Only one had been successfully criminally prosecuted, and almost all the others had gone through a secretive, closed-door disciplinary system where nobody could find out the outcomes. At Northern Illinois University, the students using public records, using invoices and calendars and emails, pieced together a story of how the president hired an advisor for $460,000 over an 18-month period who was being paid on a 2-week basis, despite the fact that his own calendars and his own invoices, which he turned into the college, showed that for significant periods of time he wasn't doing any documentable work at all. This resulted in the college being paid back a significant amount of this overcharge that would otherwise have gone into this person's pocket. They used public records, they brought an issue to public attention, they made change, they improved their campus. This is journalism, right? And this is journalism that is powered by government transparency and by the accessibility of public records that in many ways is the mother's milk of investigative reporting. When I was a journalist, I lived off of public records, absolutely lived off of them. One of my my specialties as a journalist was Medicare and Medicaid fraud. And there is an enormous and at times highly entertaining paper trail left by people who bill Medicare and Medicaid for their the provision of medical services. You find out things like that there are healthcare agencies that are no more than a post office box on a street in New Orleans where 10 or 12 companies are billing for Medicare out of the same post office box on the same street in New Orleans, right? These are things that journalists have been able to bring to the public's attention and get fixed using public records. The problem is that public records are not nearly as public as they need to be. Public records are not nearly so public as they ought to be, and that's how we need to change our campuses. We really should be, in our society right now, in our culture right now, we should be at a high watermark for public records. Public records should be celebrated from the rooftops right now, right? This is a screenshot of a Laquan McDonald video from the Chicago Police Department, where the Chicago police tried their dead level best to cling to and keep secret for over a year until an investigative journalist got a lawyer and made them turn loose of it using the Ohio Open Records Act. This is some of that tasty and delicious and nutritious Flint water, the chewable kind of water, chunky style water, that Flint, Michigan has been serving their citizens for many years, again, until public records disclosed just how long the state government knew that this water contained unhealthy levels of lead without properly alerting the public to the safety hazard. And so public records are fueling the front page stories that all of us are reading, sometimes without realizing it, sometimes without appreciating or knowing that beneath each of these headlines was a request for public records under state law. So we should be at the high watermark, right? People should be celebrating and saying, go public records, yay public records, right? Unfortunately, each and every single year, this year included, while the public is benefiting from this transparency, while this transparency is resulting in major scandals coming to light and being reformed as a result of that disclosure, legislatures are taking more and more and more records back off of the public record. Just this week, a bill was introduced in North Carolina to make teacher salaries confidential so that the pay for teachers in North Carolina would no longer be a matter of public record. When the sponsor was asked why it was being introduced, I'm not making this up, the explanation was, we don't want teachers to get jealous of each other. That was the reason. That was the explanation. Many states are taking mugshots off the records, are taking autopsy reports off the records, are taking body camera video for police off the public records so that the public cannot see these documents, these videos, these images that are being created by government employees in the course of their government business that normally can and should be produced to the public under Public Records Act. And so we're in a period of time when public records should be in their ascendancy, when people should be celebrating the power of public records, and instead legislatures continue to take more and more records away from our access. Why? Because the public doesn't invest in fighting back. Because nobody appreciates the value of these records until they're gone. And when they're gone, you don't know what you have anymore. This is something that state press associations have been fighting a very lonesome and very honorable battle for many years, and I should give a shout out to my friends at the SPJ too. SPJ is absolutely wonderful on fighting for openness and transparency, and I always tell people on campus, you should join, you should go to their events. SPJ membership is some of the cheapest censorship insurance you can buy as a college student. If you ever experience a press freedom crisis on your campus, those people will ride to your rescue. They appreciate and they get the First Amendment in a very deep way, and they will protect it in a way that very few others will. But those press associations and the SPJ can't do it alone. All of us have to be letting our elected officials know these are our records. This stuff belongs to us. When it's created by government employees, that means that it belongs to the public, and any exceptions to that should be very narrow and only with the most compelling of justifications. But we've gotten to this point where the public has to fight and scrape and scratch and often overpay, by the way, for public records. I'll share one story with you about this. So Student Press Law Center, we don't take colleges and schools to court all that terribly much, but every once in a while you find some people that really need that slap upside the head. And we did find a college like this a couple of years ago. It was in Kansas. I won't name any names, but the college was trying to charge the editor of a student newspaper $40,000 to search for and retrieve emails sent between administrators at the college. $40,000. They were telling this student that they were going to have to hire 2 full-time employees at a salary in excess of $100 an hour to go back and reconstruct these email databases and spend weeks and weeks and weeks at this $100 plus salary reconstructing this database to the tune of $40,000, which was well in excess of the annual budget for the entire newspaper for the year. We got involved, we brought suit, and it turned out that the $40,000 was somewhat overstated, you might say. It actually cost $200. Actually cost $200. The reason that the public has to fight and scratch and scrape for these records is because our public records laws are just inadequate to the 21st century needs. If we're going to have fewer journalists, and we are, we're going to have fewer paid salaried professionals who are out there to watch over government. We're going to have to make government more transparent. We're going to have to make that stuff more easily accessible so that citizens who don't have those professionals to go to the committee meetings, to go to the sheriff's offices, to go to the legislatures, to be the eyes and ears of the public so that the public can see things for themselves. We're going to have to completely rethink the way that we think of public records, starting with rethinking this idea that somehow gathering and producing public records is a distraction and an annoyance from your job as opposed to the whole entire point of your job. Right now, we have fee structures in place in every state that entitle government agencies to charge people for gathering and producing public records. And the existence of that fee structure sends a message to the people at these agencies that this is not part of your job, right? Because we don't let them charge us for other parts of their job, right? You don't call the Department of Motor Vehicles and say, hi, I'd like some information about getting a driver's license, and they say, fine, that'll be $40, right, and send me a check in advance before I'll answer you this question, right? No, they understand that that's a part of their job. They're supposed to be telling you how to get a driver's license. That's why they're there. Similarly, explaining to the public why you did what you did is not a distraction from your job as a government employee. It's kind of the whole point. That fee structure is one thing that's got to go. The other thing that's got to go, and this started with our Federal Freedom of Information Act, and now many states have a provision that emulates this, is what's called, get this, it's called the deliberative process exemption. The deliberative process exemption. Here's how that works. You go to a government agency and you say, I'd like to see these emails, these memos, these calendars, these travel. I'd like to see these records reflecting how it is that you reached this particular government decision. And the agency, under many state laws and the federal law, can tell you, I'm sorry, but we don't give out things that might tell you the deliberative process. We don't give out things that might shed light on the deliberative process, that's the phrase that they use, that might tell you how we reached the decision that we reached. Well, that's kind of the whole reason we need the records, right? I mean, the decision itself is public. The decision itself is the tip of the iceberg that you see above the water, but the iceberg itself, the concealed part, is how they got there. Did they reach this decision because a lobbyist influenced them? Did they reach this decision because a campaign contributor influenced them? Did they reach this decision based on incomplete or misleading or inaccurate information? You'll never know that in a state that honors this deliberative process exemption. That's got to go. The deliberative process is not a government secret. It is the whole point of government transparency and accountability. So we've got to rethink these laws, starting with getting rid of those fees and with giving the public complete access to the deliberative process from the get-go. Here's how this is playing out on college campuses. Right now, if you go to a school or college and you ask to see public records, there is every chance that you're going to hear this answer. I'm sorry, I can't tell you that because that's covered by FERPA privacy. FERPA privacy has become the exemption that ate the rule, the exemption that ate the presumption of openness in schools and colleges. Every state open records act starts with the presumption that records are public, that we're entitled to see them, we're entitled to inspect them, copy them, use them, right? And then FERPA comes along, the Federal Student Privacy Act. And many schools and colleges have now reflexively developed the habit of just invoking FERPA whenever they're asked for records. I am not making this up. We spent a year fighting with a school district in Northern California which tried to claim that the scores from a high school swim meet were confidential FERPA records that could not be released from the public, even though members of the public were invited to attend the swim meet. You could sit in the audience with a video camera and videotape the swim meet, but the moment that the scores were written down on a piece of paper, they magically transformed into confidential education records in this school district. That's how FERPA has been playing out. If you go to the University of Virginia, we know this because the Washington Post actually quoted the president the other day as saying this, and you ask them, how many times have you expelled somebody from the University of Virginia for committing sexual assault? You will be told, I'm sorry, but that number, that statistic is covered by FERPA privacy, and I cannot tell you if the number is 20 or 5 or 0. This is wrong. This is not the way this was intended. FERPA is a very narrow privacy statute that Congress drafted in 1974 for this reason, to keep students' disciplinary records and IQ tests and psychological evaluations not out of the hands of journalists, but out of the hands of police, out of the hands of law enforcement. What they were afraid of in 1974 was that the FBI was going to start showing up at schools and colleges and asking to see, hey, who have you profiled that might be a security risk so we can start surveilling these people, we can start following these people, we can start putting these people on our federal watch list. That's how FERPA was born. It was never meant to protect the public against inquiring journalists who just wanted to find out statistics or trends in order to improve the performance of government. It was meant to protect people against abuses by government, and it has instead become a tool of secrecy, concealment, and obfuscation by that government. Many colleges, and I'm very happy to say that University of Memphis is not one, have now thrown a cloak of secrecy over the way that they select their presidents. This is something, my slide should say, we have learned nothing from the University of Missouri. You remember the University of Missouri, right? You remember the protest by Concerned Student in 1950 by people who took over the quad and demanded that students, particularly minority students, have a greater voice in the decision-making process on college campuses, a very, very overdue voice in the decision-making process on college campuses. Their voices spoke so loudly and so resonantly, and with the support of their student athletes, that it actually resulted in toppling the president and the chancellor of the University of Missouri. Well, the University of Missouri was among the many colleges that has a practice of selecting its president in entirely secret closed-door procedures where the rest of the campus, outside of that little narrow search committee and trustees, doesn't find out anything about who's being considered until the day the contract is signed and the winner is announced. And we are literally picking presidents at many of our major public universities who have never set foot on the campus before. My favorite of these stories is the Kent State University, where Kent State University, in their last presidential search, they actually signed a contract with a chauffeur company, telling the chauffeur company that when they picked up the candidates for president to be interviewed, that they were to drop them off at the rear loading dock of the hotel so that nobody would spot them coming in the front door of the hotel and identify them as prospective presidential candidates. And so they were sneaking these presidential candidates in past the dumpsters in order to make sure that no journalists were staked out at the front door of the hotel and might take a picture or shoot a video and identify this person as a prospective president of Kent State. And so we've gotten to the situation where hiring the president of a college looks very much like consummating a drug deal.
I'm waiting for them to issue burner phones to all the members of these search committees. It's the only thing that's missing right now. They're shredding their notes, they're wearing disguises, they're dumping people off at the loading docks of hotels, they're having secret meetings in airport hangars. This is not the way to pick a president. It's not the way to create a culture on campus that values openness in government. Just the other day at Washington State University, like I say, we've learned nothing from Missouri. We've learned nothing from the experience at University of Missouri. At Washington State University, not only did they hire a president who had never spent a day visiting the campus to talk to any actual students, teachers, or employees on the campus, they hired this person in a meeting in which the search committee, in order to comply in the barest and most literal possible way with the State Open Meetings Act, held the discussion in the open using code names for the candidates, using code names, candidate A, candidate B, and candidate C, so that no one attending the meeting would even have 15 minutes of advance notice who was being hired until the vote was taken and the decision was made. And they had phoned candidate C, who turned out to be the president of Kansas State University, who accepted the job. Only then was the public allowed to know one name of a person under consideration, and to this day, no one will ever know whether a diverse group of candidates was considered. This happens to be a white male, no surprise there. Whether a diverse group of candidates got considered, or whether this search was wired in favor of one frontrunner from the very start. There's no accountability there, there's no transparency there, and it creates a culture in which open government laws are considered to be an annoyance, a distraction, and something that the campus works around rather than something that the campus values and respects. We have to fix this. I mentioned fixing our campuses. That starts with passing meaningful legal protection for student journalists. And this is the good part, guys. This is the optimistic part. The rest of this presentation has been pretty much of a big bummer, but this is the part where I'm optimistic. Tomorrow, as I'm here visiting your campus, the House Ways and Means Committee in Maryland will be taking up the New Voices of Maryland bill. And there is legislation advancing in at least 5 states right now to give college and high school journalists an enhanced level of press freedom above and beyond the very minimal amount that our U.S. Supreme Court has recognized. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 1988 decision called Hazelwood, took away from student journalists all meaningful First Amendment protection. That decision may or may not apply on college campuses. Thankfully, where you are in Tennessee, there's a very good federal appeals court decision that came out of Kentucky State University that says college journalists have a heightened degree of First Amendment protection, but that's only good until the U.S. Supreme Court speaks, and they have not yet done so. They have not yet ever had a case involving the press freedom of college journalists the way they did in the Hazelwood case with high schools. Well, we're not that patient, and we're not interested in waiting in suspense to see what our Supreme Court's going to tell us. We want to change the law state by state to add a meaningful layer of state statutory protection so that student journalists can write about issues of social and political concern without fear of retaliation. These New Voices Acts were ignited by a surprise victory in, of all places, North Dakota, which last year unanimously and with bipartisan sponsorship, and when does that ever happen in a legislature, passed the New Voices of North Dakota Act. It was the first state in 8 years to pass laws protecting the freedom of the student press. Well, after that unanimous victory in North Dakota, copycat movements started springing up all across the country from people interested in passing the same law in their own state. And you see that Tennessee is one of those that's colored in. Dorothy Bowles, my friend and colleague at the University of Tennessee, volunteered to try to coordinate a movement in this state to go to your legislature and put that excellent ruling from the Federal Appeals Court into state statute. And it's something we'll be looking very hard at doing in 2017 after the round of elections. But right now, there are bills moving forward in Maryland, in Michigan, in Missouri, in Rhode Island, and in Illinois, and another on file that may or may not go anywhere this year in Minnesota. Even if 2 of those pass, that would be more activity in 1 year than we've seen in the last decade all put together. Part of the reason is the growing recognition by our legislatures that college journalists are being asked to do more with less, are being asked to be our frontline providers of news, and are being asked to bear the burden of professional news gathering responsibility without the professional rights that go with it. We'd love to get you involved in the New Voices movement. Just by way of wrap up, because I want to make sure that we have some time to talk, I mentioned we need to change our newsrooms. I mentioned we need to change our legal system and the culture on our campuses, but we can't leave out the readers either. I don't think that there is a viable future for journalism right now if we don't address the appetite for news, if we don't address at the K-12 educational level, creating a hunger for good, substantive, objective, reliable, verified news as opposed to gossip, murmur, and cats riding Roombas. How do we do that? Well, there's already a declared crisis in civic education in our country. The American College of Trustees of Colleges and Universities recently came out with a study, and this is just one of the latest in a series of studies documenting that people are graduating, even from college, not being equipped with the basics to be informed and participatory citizens of this republic. I'm not going to run down all these statistics other than to highlight 1 in 10 identify, according to this survey by ACTA, Judith Sheindlin as Justice of the Supreme Court. We know who Judith Sheindlin is? That's Judge Judy. That's Judge Judy. 1 in 10 people in the poll thought that she was a member of the Supreme Court. And so, right, we're dealing with cranky folks out of our educational system who haven't been taught even the basics to be participatory, functional members of our democracy. And we know this. We know this, right, because our schools have been told to emphasize STEM education and to emphasize preparation for standardized testing, and social studies and civics have been given short shrift. It's very commonplace, right, nowadays for a student to go all the way through the day in a K-12 school day and never pick up a newspaper or look at a news site or discuss a news story, even though every study by the experts in civics education tells us that there's only one way to move the needle on civic knowledge, only one way to cause people to internalize and learn civics concepts, and that one way is to discuss current events during the school day. How do we fix this? We got to turn STEM into STEM. We got to turn STEM education, right, into science, technology, engineering, math, and media education. A foundational part of your diet as a K-12 student needs to be a class in the consumption and creation of media. Not because we think that most people in K-12 schools are going to be professional journalists, very few of you are going to be, but you're all going to be citizens. And you see, this happens to be a quote out of a study by the Lumina Foundation on education, but it could be from any number of studies where employers are telling us over and over again, what do they most value in college graduates and in new employees? If you ask people on the street, right, they would tell you, oh, computer coding, for sure. Being able to write computer code, that's the thing that employers want most. Turns out that's not. That doesn't even scratch the surface of what employers want most. What do they want? Critical thinking skills, ability to communicate effectively, solve problems creatively, work collaboratively, adapt to changing priorities. Those are the top 5. Guess what? That's the syllabus of Journalism 101. That's the syllabus of Journalism 101. That's what all of you are learning as journalism students or in that student newsroom or in that TV or radio station. This is the skill set that employers want most, and nobody should be getting out of a K-12 education, calling it a complete education, without having a foundational course that sets them out on a course to be good consumers and good creators of media. So in order to create a future for journalism, an economy that values news enough to pay for it, what do we have to do? We have to change our newsrooms, we have to change our campuses, and yes, we have to change our readers. I'm not pessimistic about that. That's a big ask, that's a heavy lift, but guess what? I'm old enough to remember a time when people smoked at the dinner table, when nobody separated their trash, nobody picked up their dog crap, and nobody jogged or went to a health club. This is not ancient history. This is one generation ago. All of these things will change. How? By our K-12 public education system. By our K-12 public education system telling people it's unhealthy to smoke. Our landfills are filling up and we need to value our environment. You need to exercise more and be more fit, right? That's where change starts. It's the best change maker we have. It's the best hope that we have of improving the news ecosystem so that we have a viable economic future for news. Can we do it? We have done it. We've changed people in one generation in ways that are much heavier than asking them to just spend a little bit of that time in between their time on the treadmill and their time separating the trash and the time picking up the dog droppings to sit and read some good quality news. Thanks, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Who's got one?
I have a question. What's it going to take to fight this purpose that people use hiding behind that?
Well, so the question was, right, how are we going to reform the FERPA statute so that people stop hiding behind it to conceal things like statistics about rapes on college campuses? It's going to take two things. First of all, people are going to have to keep bringing those stories to the surface, right? And we work at SPLC very hard to bring those. If you see anything at all on the news about student privacy, if you see any coverage at all about student privacy, what is it? I'll tell you what it is. It's that guy on the 6 o'clock